Part 4. Northern Siberia. No matter how he tried to keep his mind busy with work or calculation, Mikhail was finding it hard to avoid focusing on the cold-blooded murders he had committed. It started with those who had tried to come to his home, but now his mind wandered to those in the past. He thought of Brandon Dweigu's men when the Shadow made his first return to Severnaya base, then of Tsar Putin, and finally, the world. It was pressure pushing in on all sides of his brain. It physically hurt him, a pain he hoped he could ignore like all the other pains. Was this his emotions and feelings finally returning to form? Was this the price he had to pay for his sins? Mikhail didn't want to believe that, and if Beruger wasn't just spouting noise, then there was only one way to repair his mind. I will find it on my own. I've done more on my own than I will ever accomplish working with that tyrant. I may not be Mikhail Koslov anymore, but I am a man determined. Harvest Shadow had been an extensive and expensive project for the Russian government. The notes they left implied an intention to create more men and women like Mikhail. That made the reversal process all too clear. A shadow hunting down another shadow and murdering them. That hadn't been explicitly stated, but he could read between the lines. Part of him was satisfied that he had stopped his own people from creating more shadows. It would have done more harm to the world than all the nuclear weapons that were fired off the night he had started the war. They were not successful with me. That means they must have failed elsewhere during Harvest Shadow. That is where the reversal of my mind will start. Mikhail struggled to keep focus. His mind felt cloudy. He tried to have the database keep him on task, but then the thoughts of Alex, Layla, and the rest of his team came up. He felt an intense need to know where they were now, or if they were still alive, and how many survived the night he helped set the world on fire one last time. Koslov knew Alex would try to find him again, but he wished his young friend wouldn't, inevitable as it was. When Alexander did find him, Mikhail knew he would have to explain what he meant the night Morrison's tower fell. Mikhail had told Alexander shortly before cutting off his comm that the events that led them to the suicide mission were his fault. He found his emotions taking hold of him when he thought that. It was both bad and good. A piece of him recovered, but at the cost of those closest to him. Perhaps that was the price of telling the truth. Perhaps that is the breaking point. Lying was part emotion. He could lie, but telling the truth, facing the rage of the people whose future he had damned, would be far more intense. That made his mind cloudier. He started poring through the files. He needed to find a mistake, a weakness, anything to give him an edge over the dead scientists who exceeded their grasp by playing God. The database could scan through files in seconds. It could read the reports, the notes, and explain the science to him in a way he could understand. Yet there were too many details missing. The entire procedure was like holding up a picture book for a child who had never seen any of the images before. His mind broke concentration again when Severnaya's prison alarm system blared. He had another visitor. Mikhail thought it was unwise of Beruger to send reinforcements again, but that didn't matter to the Shadow. He would dispatch them just the same. Alex had learned from his first meeting with Mikhail that the direct approach was not always the smartest. He had watched while the Shadow systematically killed the majority of Brandon's team in the space of an hour. He didn't want to give the man the chance to do it again. Layla dropped him in the yard, and Alex set off the alarms as he entered the building. It would give Mikhail a chance to stalk him, and hopefully recognize him. But if not, best not to think about that right now. Alex moved down Severnaya's familiar halls. The eerie swinging lights hovered over the black metal constructs of cells the Russians had created. It was fitting that Mikhail thought this was his home. It was macabre, and that matched Mikhail's ability to kill. Alex made the conscious decision not to speak. If Mikhail wasn't thinking about who he was killing, then Alex didn't want to expose himself. Playing the obvious soldier would lead to a blade across the throat. Death by an old friend. Alex wasn't going to have that happen. He heard a creak above him and raised his rifle. He saw nothing, just the corpse-smelling ventilation system that expelled balmy air. Alex lowered his rifle, and he approached the hangar. The mess hall was just across from him. It was strange how cold the place felt, even though he had good memories of his friends here. It's because it's empty. No Brandon, Jack, or Eli, and all the rest. This place is as hollow and dead as it was when it was filled with prisoners and scientists. Alex pulled his mind from the reminiscing. He wanted to remain alert. He moved to the mess hall. It too was empty, though there were still 50 caliber shells on the ground from when Morrison's men had attacked Alex's team. Brandon, poor bastard. He made for the next hallway of the square-shaped prison. If he remembered right, that would lead to the laboratory. Mikhail watched the intruder as he perused his home like a trader at a bazaar, wandering each place as if he owned it. Mikhail followed the man through the vents. It was easy enough to keep up with his slow pace. The Shadow wondered why this man was here. Baruger's last team had come as a group, but here was one soldier whose transport had either left him, or he came by boat and traversed the ground. Kill him and be done with it. You'll find the answers on his corpse. The soldier had done no harm yet, but he was approaching the lab. Mikhail was fiercely protective of what was inside. If this man saw its contents, that could compromise everything. Mikhail found a hatch and dropped into the hall just behind the soldier, and shuttered his vision to his true sight. The gold of his iris enclosed around his white pupil, and the shadows that surrounded him returned to form. As the man ahead of him entered the lab, he did not turn on any of the lights or machines. Instead, he looked about the room. He was searching along the walls and corridors, but looked disappointed at each turn he made. Who is this man? Mikhail reached out instinctively for his blade, but it was not at his side. If he did have it, the kill would have been simple. Instead, he would have to disarm the man and beat him to death. Mikhail crept closer with each silent step until he could breathe on the man's neck. The Shadow reached for the rifle strapped across the man's back and kicked out a leg from under him. The man rolled as he fell to the ground. The Shadow went to dive a fist on the man's head when the soldier stuck out a knife. Scarred chromium steel still stained crimson. Mikhail's instant recognition of the blade made him freeze, just before his world went dark. Mikhail stepped out of Tommy's BMW, covered in the man's blood, and walked into the garage entrance of Alon's foes. He was a man that often tried hard not to be seen, but now it did not matter. There were two things he needed, and one was the hell chopper. He ran upstairs and found the access code to the bird, but stopped by the map of New Purgatory laid out on the table. He would save his friends and fulfill their goal. Mikhail reached for the survival knife at his side, bloodied and scarred from the soldiers he had slain, and drove it hard on the oak table. He took a few steps back. The blade stuck in the area that was John Morrison's tower, and blood dripped from the blade and stained the map. He didn't understand beauty, but stared at the map for a moment longer before he made for the stairs. Mikhail had to make the sacrifices in the blood worth it. He ran to the stairwell. There would be little time before the team reached Morrison's penthouse. When Mikhail reached the hell chopper, he fell into the pilot's chair and punched in the code. No one had seen him, and no one would stop him. The bird screamed into the air. From above, he could see the fires caused by the vehicle explosions just outside of Morrison's tower. He could also see hundreds of tiny dots. They were people. Riots had begun, and the rioters were targeting John Morrison's soldiers. It was a risk, but Mikhail theorized that the surface-to-air missile sites might have been abandoned too. The Shadow brought the bird close to the tower and ascended slowly. He shuttered his vision to detect heat signatures. The floors were filled with people, and he could see no sign of his team. There were Marines racing up flights of stairs and large blazes that were the fires they had started. It wasn't until Mikhail reached the top of the tower that he saw only 3 heat signatures left. 2 were on the ground. The one closest to the window stood tall, an arm extended with a gun likely in hand. Morrison. Mikhail didn't wait to confirm. He flicked open the latch on the flight stick and pulled the trigger. Machine gun fire began to spray through the windows and into the room. The man standing fell to the ground as rain began to blow in the exposed building. The Shadow knew now this was the time to leave. There was a part of him that wanted to move to the landing pad, but Mikhail ignored that and instead swung the bird around and made for the horizon. Alexander would survive, but the Shadow needed to return home. The clouds became darker as reality fled from all sides. Mikhail was staring down at the blade Alex held up in defense, and then he stood straight up. Alexander, Mikhail finally said after a few moments. My friend. From the ground, Alex smiled and forced his body up. Good to see you too, Mikhail. This belongs to you. Alex held the blade out. Mikhail looked at it for a moment longer before he reached out and took it. The shadow placed it back in the sheath on his boot, as if it had never left. Why have you come to see me? Where is your team? Most didn't make it that night. Layla and I wouldn't have either if it wasn't for you. But I have a new team now. I figured I'd hold them back in case you were... Well, Alex trailed. A wise decision, Alexander. I am happy to hear Layla is still alive. Happy? Alex asked as he tilted his head sideways. It is difficult to explain, but I believe my emotions are beginning to come back. Yet without my memories I lack context. The derision between logic and my feelings are not easy to balance. Alex chuckled and patted Mikhail on the shoulder. You and me both. The comm frequency is still the same. You want to guide Layla in? Mikhail's eyes flickered for a moment. The pair could hear the hangar doors opening from down the hall. Exile, this is Shadow. You may proceed with your landing. Copy that, Mikhail. It's good to hear your voice again. And yours, Layla. What have you been doing out here, Mikhail? Alex asked as the two made for the hangar. Research on Harvest Shadow, the project that made me as I am now. Any luck finding anything about yourself? No. It appears I was to be the first of many, and once my usefulness had come to an end, I would be eliminated by another of my kind, Mikhail replied, as he watched Alex's new bird slowly fly into the hangar. Another of your kind? Alex asked, with a hint of nervousness in his voice. You need not worry, Alexander. Our shadow started and ended with me. I ensured that many years ago. Are you sure of that? Those strange soldiers we fought at Morrison's armory and in his tower. Imitations, perhaps, but limited in their ability, Mikhail replied, cutting Alex off. If they were, then we would not be standing here. As for certainty, that is a conversation for later. It has been an arduous road since the tower, Alexander. I understand, and I'm sorry to hear that. It's going to make what I'm going to ask you even harder. Mikhail turned to face Alex. You can ask anything of me, Alexander. You have never taken advantage of me, and you are my friend. Alex let out a long sigh before he spoke again. I'm building a new team to help Talia, and to protect New Purgatory. Jack made a promise to help Tandori Shazari bring down Beijing's Cloudbreaker reactor. I owe Talia that, and we could use another vote on the council if we can get Japan to fill China's void. Another suicidal mission, Mikhail noted. Another one I want to see the end of. One I hope I can see you at the end of, Alex replied. The two watched as the team poured from the hell chopper, carrying their bags, supplies, and weapons. You have come far from New Purgatory's wastes. Influencing the council will not be an easy task. How do you intend to do it? Mikhail asked. Alex reached back and rubbed his neck. I'll explain it another time. Let me introduce you to my new team. Sam Gates, survival expert. Keely Vixer, an ex-Morrison captain who has bolstered New Purgatory's army with her own, is a solid leader in her own right. Tyrese Vale, a record keeper and a hell of a soldier. Gagil, an arena fighter out of Old Cairo. Shaylee Ferris, our medic, and of course you already know Layla. The group stared at Mikhail. The shadow shifted his vision, causing an unnatural reaction in his iris and pupil. The group were taken aback, except Layla. He does that sometimes, Layla said, trying to stifle a laugh at the rest of the group's reactions. As the introductions continued, Alex and Layla found themselves moving cargo off the bird, while everyone else moved their things into the compound or spoke with Mikhail. Does it look like he'll join up with us? Layla asked as she rolled an oil barrel down the ramp. He didn't say one way or another. There's still some shit he needs to know, and not just about us. I guess his hunt hasn't gone well. Shit. Does that mean his chances of being himself again are bad? I don't know. Wish I could tell you, but I don't even think he knows. That's screwing with his mind. If he didn't see his blade, I think he would have killed me. Layla shook her head. I'll try to get a word in with him. It's been too long. I'm sure he'll be happy to have the company. Yeah, you're probably right, Alex replied before repeating. You're probably right. It wasn't long before the new crew settled into the old bunks of Sebenaya. Mikhail had welcomed them to stay for as long as they wished, and he couldn't deny his curiosity for Alex's new team. This late in the evening, he was usually the only one up, but tonight he was joined by Layla and Tyrese Vale. They sat and sipped old tea Mikhail had found in a cabinet, while the Shadow had a half-empty glass of milk. "I've heard a lot about you, Mikhail. Feels strange getting to meet you, putting a name to the stories, I mean," Vale said. "Heroes are rarely the people humanity makes them out to be. This is certainly true regarding historians. Now this historian, I'm keeping track of the truth, the good and the bad, for better or worse," Vale corrected. "A noble goal, though you should prepare yourself for the realities the whole truth presents. I have found that it is not always easy to understand, and often the whole truth is obscured due to what it may or may not represent." "I'm not sure I understand what you mean," Tyree said. "Those who will look back at what happened at the tower may see the Crusaders as heroes, Tyrese. But without the context of the oppression men and women like Alexander went through before Morrison's tower fell, some may only see civilian casualties." "Then we write about the oppression. What happened at the tower was a deserved response to what happened at Yankee Stadium, or any of the other ruined boroughs," Vale countered. "That will not be for you to decide, recording history as you do. Perhaps there will be those that see both sides as murderers, perpetuating more murder. Those who had experienced the war will understand. Those who come to read about it after, with no veil, will question it," Mikhail explained. "Perhaps they should question it. All of it. From Morrison's rule to the way he was deposed. Perhaps people will learn not to repeat the mistakes that led to that action and reaction. And perhaps if more people questioned than before, our reality wouldn't be as it is now. That's why the whole truth must be written, Mikhail." Mikhail knew his standpoint had been from one of control, the same kind of control that had been exerted over him. He thought of what had been given to him through his blackouts, and realized Tyrese was correct. "I concede to your point, Mr. Vale." Tyrese stood up. "I'm heading out to the yard. I'll see you both in a bit." Mikhail watched Tyrese walk away, and thought he'd have to be more careful around that one in the future, and then focused back on Layla. "Sometimes I am ashamed that I must be reminded of my own history, directly or indirectly as it may be," Mikhail said aloud. "Tyrese is an idealist, but I don't think he's wrong," Layla replied. "He is not," Mikhail replied simply. "How have you been, Layla? I can see that you are tired. Has the travel affected you?" Layla smiled at Mikhail. "We've been on the move since we left California, but I'm still alive. Meeting new people, keeping Alex sane, and trying not to die has a way of wearing one down." "Yet you still continue?" Mikhail asked. "That's what defines being human, Mikhail. Pushing the limits of what can be done, even if it breaks you down or drives you mad. Persistence." "Similar to how the scientists here experimented on me, pushing past their limits of understanding, and my limits of pain," the Shadow noted. "Not a fitting example. They were trying to subvert what it means to be human, both in their process and in their product. I'd like to think we're trying to better the world," Layla explained. "So the question is what goal is worth continuing on towards?" "Is that something you've been asking yourself a lot lately?" Mikhail gave her a nod. "I wonder if I am more than what I believe myself to be. Chasing after an old life with these new feelings and trying to balance my mind is challenging. But I cannot quit. I owe it to the man trapped behind the database." "You know we will do whatever we can to help you with that, Mikhail. We need you. When you saved our lives that night," Layla trailed, "I am only sorry that I left so soon. Had I stayed, I might have been able to prevent more deaths. How many were lost?" 5, 6 if you count Ezra. He did what we thought he would, ambushed old Dell, but Dell managed to get him back before he passed." Mikhail shook his head. "Do you wonder, as Tyrese does, if there was another way?" "I try not to think about it. I can't change the past, Mikhail, and our friends are gone. One day, we will be too. Until then, I'm here, in the present." "And now Alexander seeks to involve himself in the world's politics. Why?" the Shadow asked. "We're being pursued by Thomas Baruga, Franklin Morrison's partner in developing Cloudbreaker. Berlin has tended not to involve themselves in matters beyond the Council." "That's why we're glad we found you first. He's trying to take back New Purgatory through a shadow war. But if we can get the Council to recognize this, Layla started. They would be forced to stop him, Mikhail finished. That's the goal with our vote, and if Talia's people absorb China's vote, we might have a chance to convince Jerusalem and Australia. Will the vote Cairo? Mikhail asked. They're our ace. It might take too long to make them a member of the Council, but we have their military backing. You have developed a strong plan. I will join, if only to help you both again. Layla took Mikhail's lack of hesitation oddly. Mikhail, you said the same last time, but you also wanted to see if finding the world would help you. Why come help us again? Mikhail turned his head away from her. I have learned all I can here, Layla. Nothing more is to be gained stalking these holes and searching through incomplete research. I fear that death may be my only escape. Ferris was the first person up and was in the mess making coffee. She was surprised by how insulated the facility was. From the outside, it looked like a glorified weather outpost, but the inside was a clinically pristine facility. She poured a mug of the steaming drink and took a seat. This place reminded her of home in New Purgatory. Lonely, but a nice escape. Shaylee almost jumped out of her chair when Alex came in. He was alone. He looked at her, then grabbed his own mug before sitting across from her. Morning, Shaylee. Good morning, Alex. Did you sleep okay? Actually, yeah. Cold helps. Choppers get too stuffy and hot, you know? Only too well. I get sick of them. You remind me of my old friend Ty. Same thing happened to him. Of course, he blamed his drinking. Did he ever get over it? Sure, but only by drinking more. Bastard. I miss him. I'm sorry. Alex shrugged. He went out in a way that made him proud, and on his own terms. We should all be so damn lucky. They both sipped their coffee in silence for a time. Shaylee had a dozen questions, but didn't want to frighten Alex away. She also didn't want him to think she was as rude as she had been at their first meeting. So, you're kind of like this big hero back home, she asked. Alex looked up at her, with his eyebrows raised. Shit, why did I say that? You'd have to ask Vale, I guess. Never saw a point in paying attention to that, especially all the work to be done. Oh? That's sort of a strange way of looking at it. Why? Alex asked. Pit fighter mentality is all the same. Glory in battle, honor and bloodshed. I've listened to that bullshit for years. It's weird hearing people be humble, Shaylee explained. Oh, don't worry, we all have our moments. Talia will make you feel right at home. Shaylee smiled. I can't wait to meet her. Alex noticed the other members of the team were beginning to file in, so he got up and made for the fridge. He hoped Mikhail had more here than protein solutions and hardtack. He was impressed to find a solid assortment of frozen meats and fish. Holy shit, Gates said as he approached Alex. Must have been here from our old friend Brandon, Alex explained. Know how to cook? You really gotta ask. I can make gecko taste like steak if given the time, Gates replied. Consider yourself the chef then, Alex replied. Gates shook his head and went to look through the meat. At the table, everyone except Gajil and Mikhail were talking. The two stared at each other. Neither broke away nor showed any sign of emotion. The hell is this? Alex whispered to Vale. Shh, Vale replied. Come on, Alex. You want in on this? Who do you think breaks first? Alex shook his head and sat and watched like everyone else. Gajil never blinked, sweat, or moved his body. A hair didn't rise from his arms. Finally, Mikhail broke the silence. I like this man. I believe he understands me. With the contest over, the table resumed in their conversations. Alex found himself seated near Mikhail as the smell of bacon wafted throughout the room. It reminded him of the last meal before their assault on Morrison's tower, except this situation was relaxing instead of dire. It was a chance to breathe before finding Talia and fulfilling their goal. Are all these Brandon's? Alex asked. Yes, I decided to try and save his food, though I do not touch most of it, Mikhail replied. How? It's not like there's much to hunt out here, Alex pressed. Brandon had a decent aquaponics facility next to the lab. I've modified it for vegetables, mushrooms, and the water is perfect for the fish I've gathered. You're insane, friend. This is quality meat, Vixer cut in. Ah, Captain Vixer, Mikhail asked. Christ, I wish you would all stop calling me that. It's bad luck to be called by your own rank when you retire or are discharged. Or you defect, Mikhail added. Yeah, that too. Did you have a rank, Koslov? Once, before my new life. I was lieutenant and then field promoted to captain. Field promotion is never a good thing, Vixer noted. It was in Chechnya when we were losing. This was far before either of you were born, and of no consequence today. Still, part of me remembers that there were sad times, much like now. Let's hope these days will be over soon then, and days like 'em, Tyree said, raising his mug. Hear, hear, Layla said, raising her own mug. The group joined in and laughed, and conversation was had by all. Alex detached himself from the horrors around the next corner, and let his body and mind calm down in the presence of new and old friends. Gates was finally able to make his own plate after everyone was full and drinking their third or fourth cup of coffee. He had gone all out with ample supplies. There were potatoes he shaved and fried with sausage. He took a few ribs and baked them with the strange tomato sauce he found, and of course, there was the bacon. It wasn't an omelet with spuds, but it was better than all the shit he had eaten out in the wastes. Gates took a large bite of a piece of bacon. He didn't even bother to sit down. He was at the counter, hovering over dirty pans and leftovers. It wasn't until he cleaned half his plate that he saw Gagil was watching him. Still hungry? Gates asked with a mouthful of food. Gagil laughed and reached for a few more ribs. I know what that feels like, Sam. I hope we both never have to do it again. The pit fighter smiled and then bit into a rib. It was a knowing smile. Gates returned it. He could see who had felt hunger around the table. Layla, Alex, Vale. There was the way their arms wrapped around their plates, and how there was not a scrap of food or swipe of sauce left on them. He could tell that Gagil was a man who inhaled and enjoyed every meal. Gates was no stranger to murdering for food, garbage even. Raiding gas stations and old supermarkets had defined his young life and inspired him to take nothing and turn it into something he could stomach. He figured that was more motivation to find his next meal. The others might have felt the pangs, but Gates had learned to go for weeks on rat. He pulled himself out of those days and finished the rest of his meal. Dishes began to pile in the sink. He went to work cleaning each one until Vixer came over to help. You know what they say about the person who cooks, Keeley said as she moved next to Gates. Never bought into that. I like keeping my hands busy, Gates replied. Vixer dropped a towel over his shoulder. Then you dry while I wash. That sound fair? Gates nodded and stepped to the side. They both worked in silence for a while. Keeley dumped plate after plate into the soapy water and scrubbed. Gates dried until there wasn't a drop of water left. Once the pans came up, Keeley finally decided to say something. Gates, about the raider camps. You don't have to say anything, Keeley. That was my idea. I should have told you about the remnant, what I knew they were doing out there. Maybe. But you don't have to justify why you did what you did. I'm alive and I was prepared for them. I don't stay awake at night damning you for that. I put myself in that situation. If the shoe was on the other foot, I wouldn't let you off so easily. I don't deal with what-ifs, Keeley, and I'm past what happened. But it sounds like you're not. If explaining it to me will make you feel better, then get to it. I'll listen. You think that might help? She thought about that for a moment. Keeley didn't know. She hoped it would put Gates's mind at ease, or he would at least forgive her. It was a selfish act. Maybe he still will. Yes, Sam. It just might, Keeley finally replied. Then tell me, instead of getting me to ask, Gates said. Vixer sighed as she plunged another pot into the hot water. Sanguine Rill was a backup plan in the event of something happening to Morrison or the tower. Murder first, conscription second. Like Blood Boil, it was a way to control the population and keep resistance down so we could rebuild somewhere else. It certainly didn't work as your commanders intended. The rebuilding, I mean. What I'm curious about is why your name is on the order, Gates replied. Did you see the list? There are a good 200 names on it, from the generals down to the captains. Morrison believed in unity amongst his troops. Is that supposed to make it right? Gates asked. I can't change the past, Sam. I signed that damn sheet because I believed it was the right thing to do. We were trained to believe anyone not with us were tribals, raiders, and gangs. None of us questioned that, except for a former sergeant that went on to be responsible for Morrison's death. Jack Newsom's name is on that fucking list, too. Yeah, but he walked away, long before you did. Do you regret any of it? You know, someone asked me that question a few weeks ago, and the first thing I thought was, why should I? I had some of my proudest moments with the Marines. Now I look back at what I felt proud of, all that slaughter. I see the faces of people like Alex, Tyrese, or Janet. It makes me sick because they are good people, even though we fought on different sides. Gates grabbed another pot and wiped it down. I don't know a lot about war, Keeley. My war has been with the world, or the people left in it. But if you can be this honest with someone you would have killed or enslaved, that seems like progress to me. You're thinking for yourself instead of believing bullshit fed to you from a spoon. Vixer looked away from him. His explanation was harsh but right. She appreciated his honesty. Her face flushed red with embarrassment and even a bit of anger, but that was the right way to feel. Gates, Sam, I am sorry. You tried to help me and I should have been open with you, with everyone. I could have gotten you killed because of some misguided sense of loyalty. Gates sighed under his breath. He could see Keeley was struggling with this. She embodied pride in all its aspects, and he had brushed off her first admission. That had pushed her far, but now she needed recognition, even if her mistake hadn't bothered him. He set down the towel and pot and moved over to her, putting a hand on her back. This close, he could see she was fighting to hold back tears. He thought that maybe she needed those tears. I accept your apology. I'm okay, and you're going to be okay too. You're strong, stronger than most I've seen. Strong enough to admit you were wrong and strong enough to make up for it. That matters to me, and it shows to everyone that's been around you. More hard-headed, maybe, Keeley said, trying to force out a laugh. That's why you're needed. You keep us level. If Alex and the rest didn't have the capacity to forgive you, your men wouldn't have had that second chance. They want you here. I want you here. Gates grabbed the wash pan from her hands and went back to drying. Now come on, Bubbles. Let's get this done so our hands don't prune, yeah? Vixer finally looked up, her face red but smirking. Yeah, she replied. But call me Bubbles again and I'll smack you with this walk. Ferris found herself in the laboratory with Mikhail. She thought he had to be one of the most interesting enigmas that the old world had created. All man with a mind injected with machine. Shaylee was a decent medic at best, but the puzzle that the Shadow was piqued her interest beyond her abilities. Everything I am is on that old machine, and in my mind, Mikhail said, pointing toward the only computer in the room. Shaylee looked at the rest of the lab. There were plastic and metal gurneys with restraints. Old needles and tubing filled the cabinets along the walls. Security cameras, long past functional, sat in every corner, pointed towards entrances and exits or at operating tables. This lab looked more like a morgue. What did they do to you people here? Shaylee asked, taking a step closer to Mikhail. Mikhail thought back to the memories he had regained while in Vladivostok. Imagine being a wolf in the wilds, hunting as part of a pack, roaming free, howling at the moon in the darkness of night if it pleases you. There are no gods and no masters to watch over you or shackle you. Then imagine being captured by the highest animal on the food chain. You are stuffed in a cage, tortured, mutilated, and malnourished. They do this to you to make you fiercer than nature intended, but the rest of your pack cannot handle it as you do, and you are forced to watch them all die. They take away your freedom, your pack, and your love of that old life. When it's all done, and you are what they have made you, you realize that you can no longer howl. That, too, was taken away. Shaylee shook her head. Mikhail had made the room more uncomfortable than it had been just a few moments ago. If you are ever curious to see what it looks like, then walk the interior of the enclosure. You'll find that the ground crunches with each step that you take, but it is not the sound of boots walking through snow, Mikhail explained as he moved towards the exit. You'll have to experience it to understand. With that, Mikhail disappeared behind the door. Ferris breathed in deeply. She wanted purpose, and this one was as good as any. Alex had suggested it, even though they both knew it might lead nowhere. Shaylee believed any problem could be solved with another pair of eyes. Sometimes it's a matter of being the right pair of eyes. Or a human pair of eyes. If Mikhail was all analytical, he could have missed out on subtle nuances that his creators had intended when they built him. Anything could be built, broken, or torn down piece by piece. It was all a matter of looking for the right place to start. Shaylee sat at the computer and started it up. She would find a way to help Mikhail, even if she had to stare at the screen until she went blind. Layla found Shaylee a few hours later, still staring at the terminal. It was strange to her that looking at Shaylee was like looking into a mirror that showed who she could have been. You don't even know her. Plenty of people have lookalikes. Here, Layla said as she set a mug of coffee next to the monitor. You look like you could use that. Thanks, Shaylee replied. She didn't take her eyes off the computer screen. Layla shook her head. Find anything? Just how far man's reach can exceed his grasp. The cruelty in these experiments is unlike anything I've ever seen. Even the arena wasn't this bad. It's not exactly a friendly place. Just looking around at the lab or seeing the prison cells confirms that. Mikhail told me what he remembered. I still don't understand how someone could do that to their own people, Layla explained. Who are your people, by the way? The accent, I've heard it a few times, but have never asked. You've never heard an English accent before? I was never able to tie it to a country. It's not like I've been on trips like this before, Shaylee replied. Oh, those are my people. Most of them are gone now. The war wasn't kind to my country, Layla explained. Shaylee regretted asking. Every time she spoke to someone, she felt like she had become the same knife that she used to carve into her own skin, except she was carving into other people. I'm sorry, Layla. No reason to be. You didn't push the button that wiped us off the face of the earth. But I didn't come here to talk about history, or even Mikhail. Do you like Alex? Layla asked. No. I mean, yes, of course he's a great leader. I mean, he managed to convince me to come along, and it's not like I liked him to begin with. Sure, he's handsome, but, I never really looked at him like that. Shaylee was stumbling over her words. Easy, Shaylee, it's all right. I'm not going to shoot you, I was just asking. He's persuasive. I've never heard anyone speak in a way that made me believe. I don't know if I was just fed up with old Cairo or if I felt like I had lost purpose, but you all have a cause. I feel like I was meant for this. I know how to stitch people up and fire a gun. I'm hoping that's the only training I need, Shaylee explained. You'll be fine on that front. I was just curious, Layla said. Why? Shouldn't you be angry? Layla had a half grin on her face, and she just stared at Shaylee for a few moments before replying. No, I don't have a reason to be. Layla didn't see her as a threat. A silent stab that Shaylee hadn't realized until Layla had left, and she was alone with her thoughts. Her bringing it up was just a reminder to stay away. Ferris didn't want to think about that anymore. Instead, she sipped her coffee and went back to analyzing her files one by one. Alex walked the yard. He was smoking one of the last cigarettes he had brought. He tried to think back to the lecture he used to give Tyler about drinking. He needed a bit of that lecturing now. Who am I kidding? I'm not outliving the old man. He wasn't alone. Tyrese had been out here for a few hours. Alex didn't know how he was staying warm. Usually Vale was drawing, but he was just staring at the ground. Any reason you've been out here for so long? Alex asked as he pushed off the hell chopper he was leaning on. Just taking it all in, Alex. This place, seeing it give some insight into what the old world was like. How desperate people were, Vale explained. What do you mean? You don't see places like this in New Purgatory. Killing grounds, the Tower, Yankee Stadium, or anything east of Queens, Alex listed. No, not slaughterhouses from the war, Tyrese replied. This place is different. Slaughter and secrecy for a specific goal. It's like Russia wasn't preparing to save itself from the war. Not like New Purgatory. They were trying to stop it before it started with what they created here. But they wanted to do it and control the after. You could be right. I never thought about it too much. To me, it was just another horror. Sometimes I wonder if I'm lucky living after the war. The shit here makes you think that maybe things were as wrong back then as they are now. Maybe they needed a hard reset. Steam came out of Vale's nose. Anyone else saw this, they'd probably agree with you. Everyone was trying to outpace each other, trying to come up with the next best weapon. Warheads and aircraft carriers weren't enough. Why do you think they did it? Alex asked. What's the purpose of all this death? To create more death? I don't fucking understand it. Could be any number of reasons, Alex. But if I had to guess, I bet they were afraid. Afraid? Of the rest of the world. From what I was told, the nations were living in constant fear. Oil supplies were like gold to the rest of the nations. But that gold was running out fast and everyone was trying to find an edge. Some countries looked to find a way to replace that resource, Tyrese explained. Berlin and the United States. Right, but here you don't see that. You see a research base that was trying to create the perfect infiltrator. Maybe it was the only way they thought they could stop a war before it happened. Maybe not. One thing I'm sure of, though, is that they never had any intention of peace. Alex shrugged. It's nothing but history now, Vale. History we might never know the answer to. Someone must answer for it. The shit you've seen here, the bones that litter this yard, I don't see any justification for it. So that's why you're out here then? Trying to answer questions only the dead have an answer to? Alex asked. I guess so. I don't know. I'm just here for a fight. All this quiet and reflection pulls me away from what we're supposed to be doing out here. Alex let out a long sigh, which included both smoke from his cigarette and steam from his breath. Trust me when I say this, Tyrese. There'll come a time when you'll hope you can stop fighting, so enjoy the peace you have now. I don't mean like old Cairo, Alex. I want peace just as much as you do, but there are real threats out there and I want to face them. How'd you get so jaded? Alex pondered that question. Was Tyrese asking from a place of ignorance, or was he curious about the actual changes? Alex wasn't sure he knew one way or another, but he appreciated the question. The fighting isn't so bad at first. The killing, it's easy after you get a few under your belt. Combat carries with it a fear you can't shake, and sometimes that carries over in the time afterwards. The pressure of that grates against you both physically and mentally. It makes you wonder if you can get out of the cot you spent 6 hours in, or if you can keep running on an empty stomach after 16 hours without food. What you start to realize is that all goes away when you see a friend pass in front of your eyes. I watched Elias draw his last bloodied breath before he died. Dallin saved my life and took a bullet for it. Tyler blew himself up for a mistake he had to correct. Those weigh more heavily on me than any life I've ever taken. I can't have regrets about that. I felt what I did was right. That's why I chose to fight back in Egypt. Killing doesn't bother me, Tyrese. We murdered more than soldiers when Morrison's tower went down. Everyone knows it. Janet, Layla, the refugees, but no one talks about it. The truth is a lot worse than that. We murdered innocent people, too. Yeah, they might have lived in Morrison's tower, but they were non-combatants. People who had no conception of our war. And now they're dead. Regardless of whether we acknowledge it or not, those deaths are our fault. I don't let that weigh on my mind, even though I probably should. The deaths that are on my head are of the people I've lost, the ones who made sure we succeeded that day. I carry them with me, and if I have to pay a price when I die for what I've caused, then I'll pay it. But right now, our people living or dead deserve better. Shit, Alex. I wish I wrote that down, Tyrese said. Alex tossed his cig into the snow and stomped it into the frozen slush. I already have. In Elias's old room, there's a journal between 2 books. One is written by Malcolm X and another by Winston Churchill. There's the journal I had on me when we were all still the Crusaders. You'll know when you see it. Damn thing saved my life in many ways. That's why it's falling apart. The history of New Purgatory is in there, Tyrese. Vale nodded at Alex and reached into his jacket. From it, he pulled out all the dog tags from Alex's old friends. A fair trade. I know what I need from them. I thought you wanted to build a monument. Yeah, one day. Right now, they belong to you, Alex. They all would have wanted that, I think. Alex gave Tyrese a nod, and the man left for the main building. Alex lit up a new cigarette and sighed as he exhaled smoke once more. He could see the appeal of this place for Mikhail. It was quiet, and the weight of the world didn't apply if you didn't want it to. Alex knew that wouldn't last. It was only a short escape. He thought the same shit in California. Alex wondered if Mikhail could keep himself under the illusion because the machine in his mind forced him to stay on task. As he took another long drag off his cigarette, he saw Mikhail was standing next to the hell chopper. It was as if thinking about him had brought the old soldier out of the invisible. Alexander, it is far too cold to remain out here for an extended period of time. Thanks, Mom. Mikhail, let me ask you something. If you ever find what you're looking for, what are you going to do? I mean, what if those old memories come flooding back and you forget about this life? About our friendship, about what we accomplished? Mikhail's eyes swirled a few times. I had not thought of that. If I were to extrapolate from what I know of my old life, then I believe my reasoning would be that I would not want to remember what I have done in this one, or what was forced on me, Mikhail explained. Alex stopped mid-smoke. You mean like Brandon's men? Or working for Moscow? Mikhail looked away from Alex, a human expression of guilt. He knew it, could define it, but the database didn't stop him from making that move. Mikhail had done it on his own. For he truly did feel guilty for what he had done. No, Alexander. What I have done eclipses those. My decisions directly led to your fight with Morrison, just as I told you before. And it is leading you into the fight you are in now. I remember you saying that the night we killed Morrison. What the hell did you mean? Alex asked. How much do you know about the old wars? About the state of the world before nuclear weapons destroyed most of it? Mikhail asked. As much as Layla remembers, and what Jack, Otto, and the rest used to tell us in their stories. Most of the blame falls on your country and China, but no one knows the truth. That is why I never trusted Captain Newsom. He should have told you. He should have told me what, Mikhail? I was in Moscow the night the bombs set fire to the world. My creators had finished me, or thought they had finished me. Once I passed all their control tests, I was to meet with his old Tsar face to face. He grew uncomfortable when I asked him questions about my creation and what he would do with me. I understood what I was, that I had been altered, and what they had submitted me to. But the memories of who I was were gone. I had no loyalty to these people. Mikhail Koslov might have, but I was no longer that man. They had changed me. My questions were too human for the Tsar. He berated me and treated me like an object, so I killed him in response. At first, I wasn't sure why I did it. I was angry because parts of me remembered the torture, remembered that I was someone else, but I did not comprehend that loss. I could only examine it. But there was still outrage, though I did not feel the emotion at that time. Logically, it did not make sense for a man who had been so loyal to be treated the way I was. So while I was not angry, I did find error in these methods. The same logic my creators programmed me with caused me to kill. My directive was to eliminate threats to the Russian people. The government had captured myself and others and caused us all harm. So I eliminated them. It was in that same small span of time that I used the database to fire our entire arsenal of nuclear weapons. The database had taken full control, and there was not enough of my own mind left to strike the balance between logic and madness. To be controlled, to have no say in what you can or cannot do, it is an intense feeling. At times I have opinions, though whether these belong to Mikhail Koslov and are working their way in, or whether they are from my breadth of experience I cannot say. That night I had none, so I became the one to make the world burn. I made my people suffer for creating me. I made them regret the choices they made. In doing so, I also burned the world around me. I created the situations many find themselves in now. As my emotions slowly return to me, it is only now that I realize the amount of pain I have caused. Alex's cigarette fell from his mouth and hit the snow. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure what to say. The man that had killed more human beings than anyone alive or dead stood in front of him. This was the man that killed the world, Layla's country, her parents, Elias's family, and Jack Newsom's sanity. I had to tell you, Alexander. You considered me a friend when no one else could or would, and now you know my only secret, the one I had to guard since I became the Shadow. It is a fitting name. For the longest time I imagined I was the only survivor. a shadow of a man, and a shadow of the fallen. Fucking Christ, Mikhail, Alex said. I, I, I'm not even sure where to start. I should hate you, want to kill you. But the man you talk about who fired those weapons, that isn't the man I know. It must be, for I was there. The truth cannot be denied. My actions have led your life pain and misery, Mikhail replied. The truth was molded in fallacy and fate. Alex knew it. Mikhail might have started the war, but he didn't create Morrison. He didn't cause his father's plane to crash, and he didn't kill Elias. That's not how I choose to look at an old friend. I'm too invested in this world to blame you for what you've done. Others might not see it that way, though. I do not understand, Alexander. Many would try to kill me had I admitted that to them. My assumption was that Jack Newsom did not because he needed me, though I wondered if he would attempt, would he have survived. Jack had more invested in the world as it was, so yeah, maybe he would have wanted to kill you. But then again, he might have forgiven you for what you did for us with Morrison. In any case, it doesn't matter anymore, Alex explained. What of you, Alexander? You want no revenge against me? Mikhail asked. Fuck, Mikhail, I don't even know if I can process what you did. I don't know if anyone could. But even if I did, even if I was angry, what would trying to kill you accomplish? It's not going to bring my mom and dad back. It won't rebuild London. It won't bring back all those lives. This is the life I have. Nothing but continuing will change that. And what about the others? Alex shrugged. I'm not going to tell them. I'd say you shouldn't either, but that's not my burden to bear. For the rest of your life, you'll have to live with that, be it as the Shadow or Mikhail Koslov. Thank you, Mikhail replied. This was not easy for me to share. Not many would see it through your eyes. Let's leave it here in this boneyard with the rest of the ghosts. Alex stuck out his hand, and Mikhail took it. They shook on their agreement before making back for the base. Alex gathered everyone back in the mess that evening to discuss what was to happen next. Russia was needed for their vote, so Alex opened the floor to Mikhail. General Androv was the highest-ranking member of the new Soviet army, and I believe he is still in charge, though I have not spoken to him since before I met Alexander. What kind of terms are you two on? Vale asked. I had to threaten him to get what little information he had on me. That is how I found Severnaya. Fortunately for him, he knew little about my creation. Before that, I did small jobs for him. What kind of jobs? Layla asked. Cleaning up old Soviet messes like the project that created me. There were many, and with each he rewarded me with further information about my life. I realize now that he was using what little he knew to keep me in his employ. If the general had more knowledge about me, then I might have been one more miss to cross off his list. Cleaning up old messes, Gates trailed. That might be our way in, provided he can trust outsiders. I doubt he will. We're American. He has no reason to trust us, Fixer added. Well, not all of us, Gagil said. I do not believe that will be an issue. Russia is in a poor state. It can hardly be called a country with the lack of services, military, and the rate of death. Apart from Moscow, everywhere else is considered a dead zone, Mikhail explained. He's going to want a big favor if we want them to vote our way, Layla said. What's that? Ferris asked. Alex shook his head. The one thing we can't provide because we don't know how to build it. The Cloudbreaker reactor. Luckily, that may well be in our grasp if we can secure my people's vote. New Purgatory has a reactor and scientists. Berlin could vote against us and still lose, Mikhail explained. But I know Androv well. He is an ambitious man, and if he holds assets that another wants, then he will exploit it for his own gain. He will want the promise of another nation's votes to ensure he receives the reactor. Any ideas how we secure that? Vale asked. Australia may be willing to offer aid, but that will only deadlock us with China, Berlin, and Jerusalem, Mikhail replied. Jerusalem might never vote with us, Alex added. Crusaders are still labeled terrorists for what we did to the Dome of Rock, and everything that went down in Beijing. Hell, they might not even grant us an audience to reinstate New Purgatory's status as a member. Irrelevant, Alexander. If we do not make the attempt, we will fail anyway, Mikhail said. Then our path is set before us, Gagio replied. First, we must meet with this General Androv. I will contact him. I suggest you all prep yourselves for our departure, Mikhail said. The group at the table nodded, but Mikhail stopped Alex. You may wish to bring the old bird along as well. Have the team put their things there. Alex tilted his head towards Mikhail. 2 birds? I have been told that you know how to fly now. Perhaps you lead the crew from one, while Layla and I are in the other. You can fly too, Mikhail. Why don't you take the new bird? That would not promote your learning to fly, Mikhail replied. Alex shook his head. Your idea or hers? She thought it might be better if the team's leader was close by, and the crew had the room to stretch their legs. I agree. Okay, but if that old bird crashes and burns, I know who to blame, Alex said. Your piloting skills are sufficient, Alexander. Besides, you will not be allowed to cast blame. Now I must contact Androv. Right, Alex said. I'll leave you to it. Mikhail cleared the table and let the database take hold of his mind. He tried to force a link between the satellites that controlled the connection to Moscow. Within moments, a holographic image of General Androv appeared on the table in front of him. General, Mikhail said. The image said nothing for a few moments, until it recognized who it was speaking to. Ah, Captain Koslov. I had wondered what happened to you. I was never able to thank you for handling those Americans Morrison sent. You became aware of their deaths, Mikhail asked. I am aware that shortly after their deaths, the man who pulled their strings also perished, Androv replied. I hope that has made your life easier, General. I have several favors I need to ask you. The last time we spoke, you also threatened me. I considered our relationship to be even and finished. Why would I help you now? It would mean the restoration of our people, our country, and access to the Cloudbreaker reactor. Androv became silent. Mikhail studied his image more closely. The general was sitting, likely in front of his computer. His elbows rested on the desk and hands clasped together. How? Androv asked. Those I aided in killing John Morrison are now in Powder and New Purgatory. They would willingly give over that technology for the price. Go on. First, they want your vote on the Council of Six. They want to repeal the terrorist status of the Crusaders. That gives us New Purgatory, its vote, and legitimacy back. Second is your support for New Purgatory in all subsequent votes. In return, they will always support you. The line went quiet again for a time. Mikhail knew the general was mulling it over. He was a smart man, but there would be consequences for creating this new alliance. America and Russia as true allies. I would not believe it even if the treaty were in front of me. Does that mean you are not interested, General? Androv shook his head. The New World calls for new alliances. If you have the plans and blueprints, then I have the scientists. But I will go to the council in person. I recommend one of your American friends do the same. The other countries will need to see the face of New Purgatory, war criminal or no. The Americans shall have my support, Androv announced. They will be pleased. Perhaps, Mikhail, your friends might do me a favor, while the ambassador and I work towards New Purgatory's redemption? Androv asked. Perhaps, Mikhail replied. There is always a catch with you, General. Who needs to be killed this time? Nothing so violent this time, Koslov. This involves your home in the northern wastes. Mikhail said nothing and waited for Androv to continue. You are more than you seem, and more than I wish to know about. More ashes from a Russia long past. You have proven your worth, but Severnaya is a liability. It cannot continue to exist if we are to rejoin the world. Mikhail chose to say nothing. He saw through the general's machinations, and he did not blame the man. Mikhail himself was still hiding his own secrets. You will find it simple, Androv continued. I assume you have all the data you need from that place. I have no fear of you keeping that information. Severnaya's secrets will die with you. Why now, General? Mikhail asked. Because despite what you may believe of me, I am loyal to those who are loyal to our country. You needed something from there, and I hope you found it. But the time for reminiscing is over. Berlin has taken an interest in the Soviet Union's old research projects. Be it to discredit us, or something more sinister, I would rather have them destroyed than fall into German hands, Androv replied. Explain, Mikhail replied. We have little time. Some must go to Jerusalem, but the rest must remain here until the soldiers come, Mikhail explained. Why not just burn this place down and leave? Vixer asked. Burn? In the snow? Vale countered. There is a small reactor I can set to overload, but it will take time. In addition to that, it would be better if those we send to Jerusalem return before we leave. Traveling together is advisable, Mikhail explained. Okay, but who the hell is going? Layla asked. They're going to want the person who led the attack on Morrison. I'm going, Alex answered. No way, Gates replied. If it's a trap, you won't leave that city alive. Gates is correct, Alexander, and I cannot be there to ensure your safety. I must remain here to ensure this is all destroyed, Mikhail added. Layla was shaking her head from the other end of the table, though she wasn't saying anything. Alex looked at the faces of his team. They looked unsure. Hell, he felt unsure. It was as thrown together of a plan as any. We've got to take this risk. If New Purgatory gets a seat back on the Council's table, then that could make a lot of lives easier. Not just ours, Russia's, Talia's people, Old Cairo. I've got to do this, and I need you, Layla. The Silver Angel can get us there and back quick. Layla forced a smile, but Alex knew it was through worry. But she gave him a nod and he smiled back at her. He hoped she saw his confidence, and that it would provide her some ease. That leaves you in charge of my team, Mikhail. Did Androv give you any clue as to what you'll be facing? Alex asked. More of Beruger's augmented soldiers. The Berliner has taken an interest in this part of the world, Mikhail replied. What do you mean, augmented? Gajil asked. Alex remembered the super soldiers that had nearly wiped out his team. They had been piloting a hell chopper, and Janet had dead-eyed their pilot from the ground. The bird crashed not far from their position, but the soldiers had survived and came after them. They're like Mikhail, but different. I can't tell you the science. I'm sure only Beruger could. All you need to know is that they don't die like you or me. So put an extra round on them, try to keep them distracted. They don't fight as well when they're focused on different targets, Alex explained. Gajil nodded, but the others looked uneasy. The augmented were something to be experienced. He was unsure he could explain them the right way. Asking them to fight an unknown enemy while they waited for extraction wasn't his idea of good leadership. Alexander, we will be fine. Beruger has tried to stop us before. He will not succeed now, Mikhail stated. Yeah, well the computer chip said, Gates added. Time went by quickly when Alex was with Layla. They were aboard the new hell chopper and on their way to Jerusalem. It wasn't a feeling he reveled in anymore. Alex wanted the few moments they had together to last longer. It was respite from the moments where they had to run for their lives or kill those who threatened them. Alex also hated that he had to leave his team behind, but the opportunity was grand. It was a chance to put New Purgatory back on the Council, expose Berlin, and, at the very least, earn new friends on the Council. But Alex wished the team could be here to see it. He believed that it helped to see the faces of those he fought for around him. They were a reminder that no matter how much pain he suffered, he would do whatever it took to see them in a world free of tyranny. How long? Alex asked. We should be there in the morning, Layla replied. Androv expects us to be there in the middle of the day. That should give us time to plan what you're going to say. Don't worry about that. I have a fair idea of what needs to be said, Alex replied. You're sure? Alex could only think of one thing to say, something he had asked too much of his friends and lover lately. Trust me. Layla shook her head as she focused on the controls. How could I not? You still angry with me? Alex asked as he checked his coat for his smokes. You're getting back to the man I remember. If you can show that with the Council instead of firing a bullet into the Berlin ambassador's skull, I might even say I'm impressed, Layla teased, while reaching back and giving one of his arms a firm grip. Alex looked off into the night sky. He was happy that she wasn't angry with him any longer. It was a side he wasn't used to seeing. For so long, Alex had been used to her unquestioning loyalty and unconditional love. The prospect of losing her struck him like a knife in the gut. He didn't want to worry about that now. Jerusalem was the worry in his mind. He didn't have a great plan, just a simple one. All it required was for all the moving parts of the last few weeks to fit right. Time will tell. This is what being a leader is about. Back at Severnaya base, Mikhail was setting up spots for each of the members of his team. He and Gajio would lurk in the shadows for the enemy, while Gates and Vixer used the catwalks to rain down bullets. Mikhail decided that Vale and Ferris would be best flanking whatever Barucher decided to send. It was not a foolproof plan, but Mikhail thought it was best for an unknown enemy. After the team memorized their placements, Mikhail sent them off to eat while he stood watch at Brandon Duigu's old post on the roof. It was a simple bird's nest. Sandbags were built up to chest height and covered a canopy. From here, the Canadian sniper had watched for invaders that never came until Mikhail arrived and ruined the dream of imperviousness from Duigu's fragile psyche. Though that long since mattered. Brandon was dead now. That didn't stop the shadow from looking around the nest. There were empty bottles of booze and old half-burned cigars lying around. Duigu had his demons. Is this the life I am fighting to return to? One where emotions overtake logic, and all that is left is vice. Mikhail questioned humanity at times. People were often illogical. It disgusted him and made him wonder why he was so determined to bring his old life back, though it did occur to him that had he any vestiges left of humanity in him before the end of the world, then perhaps he might not have pressed the button. Mikhail tried to avoid those thoughts. Humanity had the capacity for beauty as well. He enjoyed the music they had created, their feelings for one another, and the trust they placed in their friends. Those were experiences he wished to know, truly know, not experience on the surface only to store it away as a simple file in his automated brain. He needed to focus on those positives. Mikhail might have struggled with recognizing which emotions were coming back, if any at all, but he knew a positive outlook could only help in his goal. Brandon's life did not aid in that. He, like so many others, was a bad example of what being a human had to offer. Being human. I am human. My mind is different from others, but that does not make me any less human than they. I cannot carry myself apart from them. You all right up there, Mikhail? It was Vixer's voice, the traitor captain who hated the reminder of her rank. That was how Mikhail identified her, for it was how she sought to portray herself. Yes, I am fine. Is the team rested and prepared? Restless is more like it, but we'll be ready on your order. On my order? Mikhail's world started fading to black around him until the white of the snow was no longer visible. You'll have your orders, Captain. Mikhail struggled with the battlefield radio, forcing it closer to his ear. But there are civilians. The siege ends today, Captain, whether you keep that title or hang from the building like the rest of the Mujahideen. Mikhail couldn't hear himself sighing over the sound of artillery firing behind him. Their rounds crashed into every building in range, murdering men, women, and rebels in dozens. Yes, sir, Mikhail replied, hanging up. He stood and moved to his team. They were waiting in a trench dug behind the lines of artillery cannons. Ready. On your orders. Mikhail did not need to explain the mission to his team. Most military work was simple enough for the grunts, but this wasn't a basic maneuver or a border skirmish. This was the second invasion of Grozny. The government would rather leave chance to the Spetsnaz. The team moved into the city. They were to slaughter the escaping rebels, a task made difficult because of identification. Mikhail knew that many civilians would be murdered today, simply for living in Grozny. You have your orders. Mikhail and his team took step after step towards the civilians. He felt his stomach twisting as falling parts of buildings rained down around them and onto the citizens. His own men wasted no time firing round after round into the people attempting to escape the city. Mikhail wondered if he would be given another medal for this. That thought stayed with him as he pulled the trigger on the people he thought he looked most like rebel forces. His world was turning black around him, but not before he took in the faces of those he murdered. Some were not even carrying weapons. They were just trying to get out of a city being razed to the ground. Mikhail! Mikhail! Vixer shouted into the comm. Not again. The shadow pulled himself from his haze. I'm here. I lost focus. Well, you better get in here. There's a chopper that just landed right next to yours. Mikhail turned to the side. There was a new bird set down on the snow, and its crew was moving into the building. Gits, got the powder, Mikhail ordered. A few moments went by. Mikhail crouched down and saw the exterior lights on the building go out. What now, boss? Gates asked over the comm. We watch, and we wait, Mikhail replied. When Alex and Layla arrived in Jerusalem, they were surprised to find General Androv waiting for them at the hangar. Alex assumed the general must have left earlier than he said, or had already been on his way to the Holy City. Alexander Valesko, it is good to finally meet you, the general said, extending a hand. Alex shook it. Same to you, General. You're prepared for what comes next, I assume?
I could ask you the same thing, the general chuckled. But I suppose the man that stormed Hell's Tower has little to fear from the stuffed shirts of the council?
Alex smiled. Yeah, well, that all depends on if our vote passes. If not, I'll end up in chains, or worse.
A possible reality, Alex. But Russia will stand with you regardless. Perhaps even offer you asylum.
Anyone else that might look our way, General?
Clearly not Berlin. They take issue with both our countries. This means that the Chinese are likely to vote their way as well. That leaves Jerusalem and Sydney to decide the stalemate.
Neither of those countries have any love for us. We harbored a terrorist from one of them, and I'm sure you're more than well informed of what happened several months ago.
Yes, that is why these meetings will take place at the Tower of David instead of the Dome of Rock,
Androv replied. We shouldn't waste any time then, Alex said. My other connection should be waiting for us. The trio made it to the tower, where a man in full silver regalia waited for them. Castor, Alex said with a nod.
Alexander, I am ready to see if your promises were more than just words.
Yeah, me too. Come on, Alex said. They're waiting for us. General Androv led them into a room with a large table where each member of the council sat. Alex was surprised that a chair, along with a placard that read New Purgatory, was still at that table. But that wasn't as surprising as the sight of Thomas Beruger sitting in Berlin's chair.
Ah, so the American finally joins us, with both Russia and England at his side. Freedom certainly does ring from those fellows, does it not, Alexander?
Alex felt the eyes of the council turn on him. He knew why Beruger came. The scientists wanted to make him look bad and force the other countries to vote his way. It's a display of power. He's not a politician. I'm not either, but I've been fighting him and his dogs. He could never understand that. I'm not here to waste your time, counselors, so I brought along a gift that might encourage you to hear my case, considering our recent history. Alex started, as he took New Purgatory's chair.
Of course, the Jerusalem counselor said. First, we need to call this meeting of the Council of Six to order. Presiding is Alexander Velasco of New Purgatory, Commander-in-Chief Sid Lawson of Sydney, General Yaroslav Androv of Moscow. Lead Cloudbreaker scientist Thomas Beruger is sitting in for Jen Zeberhardt of Berlin, President Zhongwu of Beijing, and I am High Counselor Joseph Bernard of our holy city, Jerusalem. As you all know, this meeting is to discuss New Purgatory's possible rejoining of our council. Now, Alexander, you mentioned a gift in good faith. What might that be?
I offer another nation for your council, Old Cairo. It is a place that many have considered a dead zone, but the people there survived and have a standing army. They seek to rejoin the world and its new government, and they have the necessary resources to do so, Alex said.
An interesting proposal, Alex, but they would have to go through a probationary period in addition to being voted in,
Beruger replied. Our people are prepared for any test this council has for us, Castor cut in. The question is whether you'll put this matter to a vote. We will vote on this. First, there needs to be some clarification, Alexander. You will not have a vote in this matter of Egypt. However, because of New Purgatory's history, you will have a vote in favor of the matter of reinstating your council status, Lawson explained. Very well, Alex replied.
Excellent. Then we shall begin with the matter of Old Cairo,
Bernard said.
General Androv.
I vote yes.
Lawson tilted his head at Androv for a few moments, and brought a few fingers to his chin. He looked over at Alex, and Alex stared back. Yes, Lawson finally said.
No,
Beruger answered as the council's eyes turned on him.
I've lost people who have flown to Egypt simply to offer aid. Those same people have never returned. I do not trust them.
No, President Wu said curtly. Alex turned his head to Joseph Bernard, who sipped from his glass of water. The man was clearly comfortable in high-pressure situations like these. He smiled while Alex felt his fingernails digging into the table.
We need more alliances, especially those close to the Council's capital, Bernard said. The Council of Six was founded on the idea of a fresh start for the world, and the possibility that we would eventually grow and accept new nations as they rose from the old world's fire. Therefore, I am voting yes.
And the vote passes. Ambassador Castor, is it? Lawson said. Yes, sir. Maeve Maris regrets not coming here herself, but she hoped that her second would suffice, Castor explained. You do? You'll remain with us. We'll be able to vote after a year, unless circumstances arise that counter that rule, Lawson explained. I understand, Castor said as he pulled up a metal chair to the table.
Now then, Beruger said calmly, what is New Purgatory's real proposal, Alexander?
Alex stood from his seat and took a breath. He knew this was his only chance to make New Purgatory a legitimate city once again. He was nervous, but as he looked around the table at the counselors, he felt a familiar feeling. It was the same feeling he had when guns were pointed at him. It was both frightening and exhilarating. My request is simple. New Purgatory wants its place back at the table. But to do that, I need the terrorist label of both myself and my team cleared. Those of you here knew us as the Crusaders.
We've temporarily rescinded your status because of General Androv's urging, but you are lucky to even be sitting here with us, Alexander. Now you ask us to annul it completely with no recompense? Especially after the display put on not more than a few months ago. You held all of us, save the late former Chinese ambassador, hostage, Bernard said.
That display had a purpose. It got your attention. John Morrison forced his people to rebel. The destruction we caused was an action to counteract this council's inaction. How long were you going to let the atrocities John Morrison created stand? One counselor died, but the rest were spared. That brings no comfort to our dead, President Wu yelled, banging his fist against the table. Then you shouldn't have led us into a trap, counselor, nor hired a bounty hunter to try and kill my team. The same bounty hunter that killed my best friend. And let's not forget about the slavery of Japanese citizens, which caused your former ambassador's death. Lies! Blatant lies! Wu yelled.
Enough! Beruger called out. You are quick to point out another nation's sins, but what of your own? Revenge? Outward attacks on non-combatants? Can we really rely on this as leadership for our council?
No. You can expect an ally that fights for what is right. You call me a terrorist, but the people who were enslaved and forced to work under Morrison, or those who lost a parent, or sibling, or child to him, they call me a revolutionary. I'm not one for titles, and I'm not a hero. I'm a man that murdered a lot of people, more than I can count. But I will tell you this. When you walk those old torn roads and you see a family butchered in the street because a father wouldn't let soldiers take them from him, you realize you're not living life. You're living in a nightmare. I challenge any one of you sitting at this table to walk those same torn roads as I have and ask any man, woman, or child if they are better off now. Better off not having to run from every Marine patrol. Better off being in control of their fate. Better off being able to fight for what they believe in. There was silence for a time. Alex could feel heat and sweat on the back of his neck. He wanted anyone at that table to challenge him, to tell him he was wrong, to deny him the death of his mother, or the carnage at Yankee Stadium. It was all he could do to control the rage he felt pouring from his heart and into his knuckles, which were ghastly white from the grip he had on them.
Much of what Alexander says is the truth,
Androv entered, as he broke the silence.
For too long, our people have suffered indignities by this council. We will not see it happen to one of its oldest members because of a leadership change. Their innovative ideas are better than the grandstanding and lies we have all been forced to swallow.
I am surprised at you, General. Your people have benefited under this council, and we gained the right to see the new world that we are building. Perhaps you've lost sight of that,
Beruger said. The general did not betray the same anger Alex was feeling. He simply smiled.
Well, Thomas, you may have benefited, but while your people are safe and fed in Berlin, mine are still suffering without clean water or power. Indeed, the technology you promised us has yet to arrive. Moscow has few winters left before we're no more than a dead zone. And when that happens, none of our people will be left to challenge you on your false promises. But you know this.
There are systems in place.
Save your excuses, Thomas.
Androv cut him off.
I have no time for it, but I don't need to wait any longer. There are others that will acknowledge your deceit and do better for it.
Alex watched as some of the other counselors began to stare at Beruger, somewhat bewildered. Was this the first time they had heard such accusations? Mikhail had explained it to him once. Tsar Samarkvalov and President Wu had given a speech that convinced the other counselors to share Cloudbreaker with those respective nations. And while Berlin had come through for China, the same was not true for Russia. We'll investigate your claims at a later time, General, but for now we shall return to the issue at hand, Ambassador Lawson said.
Was there anything more you wished to add to your case, Alex?
Joseph Bernard asked. Alex turned his head and looked over at Layla. She smiled at him and put a hand on the back of his shoulder. Only that I have no problem creating alliances and using whatever means that are at my disposal. If this council does not accept me, then there are others that will. There are those in dead zones who aren't afraid of my brand of revolution. Again, there was silence. Alex fell back into his seat and pulled Layla down to sit with him. She did, and kicked her feet up on the council's table. Beruger sneered and raised his hand first.
I vote no. He is immature and unfit to sit on this council. He will lead one of our founding nations to ruin. I won't stand by and see this perversion happen to the world we're trying to rebuild.
No, Wu said. I won't allow this murderer to sit with us.
Yes, General Androv said. The American has a plan, one that I believe will lead to equal opportunity for all.
Alex caught Androv glaring at Beruger. He wondered if the Russian general might be siding with the Germans right about now, had Beruger and Morrison given him the Cloudbreaker technology. The Jerusalem counselor was tapping his fingers together. He had looked confident before, but now beads of sweat were running down his forehead.
I would like to take your side, Alexander, for what you say, what you believe, and for making no excuses for your actions. But I find I must do the same. You attacked this city, destroyed a holy monument. It is my responsibility to hold you to your crime. I vote no.
Alex let out a sigh and faced Sid Lawson, the Australian counselor. Have some courage to come here after what you did, Velasco. Whether it was a product of your own doing or the influence of Jack Newsom, you turned Naola Hargrave a traitor. She was one of our best agents. She may have fallen victim to the charms and influence of her old commanding officer. I convinced her to join in on what we thought was a foolhardy venture. A venture that ended in several dead Rangers, including Naola. Still, there you stand, defiant to the power wielded by each member of this table. And you ask for our help. Alex kept his stare locked with Lawson's. Those are crimes, but the Rangers were created to monitor the events of the world. In the travels we also saw that you killed Shea Vito, another traitor to our nation and a war criminal. You also stopped John Morrison's senseless killings, which had occurred since Operation Blood Boil. A crime that no one sitting here can deny. There's enough evidence there to clear your name. Had you not acted, then we would have. But you beat us to him and exposed our inaction and our leadership. There are those of us in the Rangers that believe in what you accomplished, that not all of us saw Naola as a traitor. But circumstances at the time... Sid Lawson looked over at Beruger. Circumstances at the time prevented us from offering aid or clearing her name. It's why General Cale Woodson and Ranger Commander Helio King asked me to come to this council. They would have me honor the memory of one of our people, who would become one of yours. Australia votes yes. Alex turned his head back to Beruger, whose face was red with rage.
How? They are murderers! Killers!
The council does not need to explain itself, Beruger. Our decisions are our own, Androv replied.
Because this motion was put forth by New Purgatory, that means this vote is in a deadlock. 3-3,
Joseph Bernard said.
That means this vote can only be resolved by... No,
Beruger interrupted.
You cannot allow that. He brought Egypt into the fold. You can't. The rules are clear, Beruger. If you don't like it, you can have your ambassador vote in your stead, but I will not have you question the authority of this council.
Bernard shouted before straightening out his suit.
Now then, Ambassador Castor, with only you to settle the deadlock, how do you vote?
Why, we vote in favor of New Purgatory, Counselor, Castor said, all the while staring at Thomas Beruger in his foul grimace.
It is settled then. New Purgatory regains its vote, and the Crusaders' terrorist label is repealed,
Bernard announced. Beruger looked at his fellow members in spite.
You will all regret the choices that you have made today. You have no comprehension at what you have done.
The rest of the counselors shook their heads, save for the Chinese counselor who took his leave with Beruger. A good display, Alexander. Still, you must name a new ambassador. A man such as yourself has more plans for the world than a seat at a desk, I'm sure, Sid Lawson said. That's true, but I have another proposal to bring. Now isn't the right time. I was hoping that when I next return to this council, my ambassador and a new proposal will be ready for you. The council nodded in agreement.
Very well, Alexander,
Joseph Bernard said.
We will give you some time. Until then, matters of the council will be deferred to the representative in New Purgatory. Who might we contact?
Janet Trishella, Alexander answered. I'll be surprised if she doesn't believe you at first. It's a surprise, Alex said with a smile. He left the council and made for the door with General Androv and Layla close behind. Mikhail crept through the shadows near the hangar, and Gajil was right across from him. The Hellchopper only brought 4 soldiers, including their pilot. Alex was right, Mikhail said into his comm. What do we do? Gajil asked. I'm unsure if their abilities rival mine. Gates, get their attention. Gates pulled back on one of his magnesium arrows and flung it into the center of the group. The blast did not disorient his targets. Instead, they aimed up at the catwalks in unison and began to fire. Gates and Vixer ducked behind the shielded railing. The sound of bullets slamming against their protective wall and the vibration of it against their bodies gave a facade of safety. Mikhail watched from below. Cover fire, now! Ferris and Vale responded to the Shadow's call by shooting their guns from opposite hallways. Their fire drew the attention of the augmented soldiers. Mikhail could see their momentary hesitation. The soldiers struggled to fire in 2 different directions at once, and when they did, the rounds went off against the walls of the floor, but never near the intended target. Gates continued his barrage of arrows, further disrupting their vision, while Vixer brought down her own hail of bullets. This is our chance, Gajil. Move in close and take them one at a time, Mikhail ordered. The augmented soldiers were too focused on the separate directions of gunfire that they did not see Mikhail approach, his knife drawn. The Shadow slashed his blade through the throat of the first soldier he encountered. The soldier stayed up straight and tried raising his rifle up at Mikhail, but the Shadow slashed again, this time across the chest. By now, the soldier was firing his weapon, and Mikhail had rolled to the side of the gunfire. How the hell is he not dead? Vale yelled out as he fired rounds into the cut-up assailant. Mikhail had no answer for Vale. Alexander had been clear on their vulnerability, or lack thereof, but something had changed. The Shadow went for another strike, this time driving the blade into the heart of his foe, twisting as he gripped the rest of the soldier's body with his free arm. The soldier did not cry out, even as Mikhail felt hot blood pour onto his wrist and arm. He only stopped twisting when the body went limp. He watched as one soldier was engaged with Gajil, while the other 2 were firing into the catwalks. The Shadow flung the blood from his blade to the cold floor and picked another target. Gajil started by disarming his enemy, knocking the man's rifle to the ground and following up with hard punches to the chest and sternum. Each attack had no effect. The soldier did not try to block the strikes and instead went for his own attack. Gajil dodged and ducked. Without a weapon, he had no way to kill this man. Then he remembered his allies above. Gates, give me an arrow you don't mind losing. He was replied to by an arrow crashing into the head of his enemy. The man kept fighting, but Gajil reached for the arrow. He pulled the arrow from the soldier's skull and thrust it into the soldier's neck so many times that the shaft broke at the center. Gajil realized the tip of the razor had been left in the man's head. He hopped back and then threw a hard kick to the skull that drove the arrowhead deeper into the soldier. The augmented man tried lifting his arms over and over, but each time they fell to his sides, until he finally dropped to his knees and collapsed. Gajil was breathing deeply. We need another way to kill them, Mikhail. Don't worry about that, boys, Vixer said over the comm. She jumped down from the catwalks and lifted her rifle, just as the 2 remaining soldiers looked her way. Stand clear, she yelled. Mikhail and Gajil retreated, and Vixer launched a grenade from her rifle that shrouded the soldiers in smoke. Vale, Ferris, everything you have, now. The 2 left their cover and flanked the exposed soldiers. Vixer launched another grenade. This one enveloped the smoke with fire. Then, when she had used all her tricks, began firing rapidly into the 2 fiery figures. Gates watched the crossfire in amazement. It had been perfectly executed, but he wondered if it would even work on whatever these monsters were. When the smoke cleared, Mikhail moved back toward the hangar. Vale, Vixer, and Ferris had retreated to cover. The two bodies still stood. They were badly scorched and riddled with bullets, but they made no effort to continue their attack. Their weapons were destroyed by the fire, and their arms could no longer be held up. They just watched as Mikhail neared them. Most of their flesh had melted off, and what was left of the gear they had worn was destroyed by weapons fire. Whatever control was being exerted over them made them live far beyond the constraints of humanity.
Like what my people wanted from me.
Mikhail wondered if they truly ignored pain, or if the souls trapped inside of the bodies were screaming for an end to their suffering. The Shadow hoped he was wrong, but just the same he thrust his dagger into both of their hearts. When it was done, he stood over the bodies and looked down on them. Though he was only beginning to regain his emotions, he felt sickened. This was what his people had wanted him to become. More than ever, he wanted to find a way to regain his humanity. He could never become this. "Tell me you're joking." It was Janet's voice over their communicators. Alex looked over at Layla and smiled. "No joke, Janet. We're part of the council." You should have seen the look on Baruger's face. They could hear Janet's laughing over the comm. "Shit, I knew I could count on you. How did you swing Russia's vote, though?" "Loyalty and the reactor. We need to get the researchers to dig up some of the old blueprints," Layla answered. "I'll get Vixer's refugee eggheads on it. Who's going to be our ambassador then?" "I'll get that sorted when I see them again. For now, you're going to be their point of contact. After we finish the job in China, that'll let us move Talia's people into power, and then we out Baruger," Alex explained. "It's a bold move, I'll give you that. You better hope he doesn't decide to stop you from getting there," Janet replied. "Don't worry about that. He's not like Morrison. Baruger wants us all to die in the shadows, otherwise he'll take all the blame, especially now with the council watching us all. We'll see. Until then, I'm making sure our new soldiers are ready." "Copy that, Janet. We'll see you once we're back from Beijing." "You bet. Stay safe out there, you two." Layla cut the line and set the autopilot back for Russia. "Not bad for a revolutionary, I have to say." Layla wrapped her arms around Alex's neck. "Yeah, don't get too attached. I'm not a politician. I just figured if I yelled loud enough they might hear me." "It certainly worked for the Australian councillor. I wonder if they honored Nyala back in Sydney." "That's the least they could do for her. She did their job for them," Alex said. "So are you going to be our new ambassador?" Layla said as she tilted her head forward. "No. I'd rather aim my gun than talk those people to death. I hate talking." "I don't know," Layla said. "You used to talk to me all the time. You can be very persuasive." Alex leaned his head to hers and kissed her lips. "I never waste words on them when I could be talking to you. And one day I'll get back to that. We can really set aside the killings." Layla smiled a sad smile. She knew he'd never give up the life he led. The thrill was an addiction stronger than any drug. She knew the feeling all too well. "I hope so. We're not going to be this young forever. Besides, I have some ideas about what we'll do when this is all over." "Oh, what's that?" Alex asked. Layla held back her true answer. "First, I might want to go home again. At least one more time." "If that's what you want," Alex said, picking her up under her thighs. "I'd like to see it, just to make sure it's still there. But that can wait." "And tonight?" "Tonight I remind the man I love how much I love him." The two kissed again and embraced. The Hellchopper joined the stars in moving through the night. Gates felt the pangs in his chest. It must have been just past midnight. His goddamn heart always screwed with him at midnight. He clenched a hand on his chest, hoping it would just go back to beating normally. Gates breathed in and out a few more times before his heart finally gave in to his wishes. Christ, how the hell am I going to keep doing this? Where most men and women would be horrified by what they saw today, Gates just figured it to be another occurrence in an ever-changing world. Still, he thought that didn't make whatever those soldiers were right. Thinking about them would do his heart no good. He needed to relax. Vixer turned over in the bed and put a hand on his chest. "Hey, are you all right?" she asked. "Shit." Gates faked a smirk and brushed Fixer's blonde hair behind her ear. Yeah, just some horrible shit today, Gates replied. Vixer narrowed her eyes at him. Nothing like that out in the dead zones? She asked. I've seen some bad shit, Keeley. Friends die, people eating each other. But I've never seen a man burned alive and still stand. Even thinking about it makes me hurt. Vixer shook her head. And here we were having such a great night. Hey, you wanted to sleep in here for warmth? And you're warm, aren't you? Asshole, Vixer said as she laid back down on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. Vixer didn't have to wonder why she did what she did. Gates was attractive to her because he was an outsider, and for some reason he still gave her his time even though he had seen the worst of her. Gates didn't and wouldn't judge. He had seen the worst humanity had to offer. Keeley figured she didn't fall into that category, and that Sam was able to recognize the difference was admirable. That, and he's not bad looking either. For a waster, that is. Don't think too hard in there. The steam coming off your head is making me think I'd be warm enough alone, Gates said, teasing her with a poke in the ribs. I swear to God, if I didn't like you, I'd kill you, Sam. Like every other lady in my life, he replied under his breath. What? I said, come here. You got me up, now I won't be able to sleep again, Sam replied. That's what I thought. Alex and Layla arrived at Severnaya during midday. They saw another hell chopper and put their bird down next to it. No one was around to greet them, which Alex took as a bad sign. Mikhail, Vixer, anyone around? He asked over the comm. Shit, Layla said, reaching for her SMG. It's the middle of the day, they can't be asleep. Alex shook his head and unslung his rifle, edging towards the mess hall. Empty. He tilted his head towards the halls, so Layla went that way while Alex went in the opposite direction. He looked at the cells and the extra bunk rooms but found no one. He didn't find anyone in the laboratory either. It made him wonder if he was being watched. Anything, Layla? Other side is clear, Alex. Ideas? He thought for a few moments. The only other place they could be is outside, but why wouldn't they answer the comm? Meet me out there, Layla said. Let's find out. When the two found their way to the enclosed area, they could see why the team hadn't replied. They were digging as well as they could through snow, ice, and bone. In the roughly 6-foot crater they had dug were 4 corpses that could hardly be called bodies anymore. Christ, Mikhail, Alex said as he moved beside the shadow. What the hell did you guys do to them? Mikhail turned and faced Alexander. What had to be done? They are free. I wouldn't call that free, Layla said, looking away from the burnt, mutilated bodies. More like torture. What Baruger did to them was torture enough. I wouldn't want to be his slave, Vixer said, pulling herself out of the hole. What do you mean? Alex asked. I looked inside the most intact one. The results and their implications are horrifying, Mikhail explained. Baruger has taken research from Harvest Shadow and perfected it. These soldiers you fought in Morrison's tower, they were modeled after me, with a large exception. And that is? Alex asked. Control. Baruger can tie their minds to each other and control them like a puppet master. It explains their lack of reaction in combat. They rely on each other and his vision, though it is possible that he could modify this, or worse, only use a single soldier, but for stealth rather than brute force. Alex shook his head. Mikhail was drawing parallels he didn't like. One shadow was enough for this world. How did he get his hands on this research? I thought no one had been here since before the war, Alex asked. Mikhail said nothing for a few moments. The location of this base was only known to a few. Androv had the information but did not know the location until I pressed him to retrieve my personnel file. John Morrison may have had the tracker on your bird and relayed that information to Baruger. Or it is possible Baruger knew of this place before the war. If that were the case, it is possible my creators are not dead, but are on asylum in Berlin. Alex shook his head. If that's the case, they've had time to innovate on your design. These could just be throwaways. A reasonable analysis, Mikhail replied. If he suspects us going to China, he could have an army of these things waiting for us, Mikhail. Indeed, Alexander. But as you have said, it is a debt that must be repaid, Mikhail stated.
The pieces might change, but the game doesn't, Tyree said as he shoveled snow and dirt back into the grave. Is the reactor rigged? Alex asked. We were only waiting for you, Mikhail replied. Then get your things and get aboard the bird. We're going to Tianjin. Understood. Alex was sitting on top of his bird. He traveled light. His gun and one bag were all he had to load. He waited as Gates, Vale, and the rest packed up blankets and clothing for the stay in China. Alex wasn't sure how long they would be there. He had fought a war against John Morrison for years. Starting a war against China, a real war, could last an unknown amount of time. His hope was a few weeks. It all depended on Talia and Tondori's plan. He assumed there would be more to it than just taking the reactor. They're going to want their own one day, just like the Russians. He tapped his pen against his pad. Writing was becoming more difficult for him now. He could see more and explain it back to himself with pen and pad. Now he was living every moment, and reliving it at the end of a pen wasn't helping his mental health. He was worried. Not about seeing Talia or fighting another war, but that he wasn't bothered by the upcoming fight. Might as well be dead. He knew he had plenty to be nervous about. China wasn't going to be easy. Alex wasn't even sure what plan the old man had given Tondori. Whatever it was, he was sure it would end up with blood being spilled before the grand finale. We're lighting up an entire city with an underground nuke. You all right up there, Alex? It was Gates, taking a break and chewing on some meat he had dried. I'm thinking about how we're going to solve New World problems with Old World methods, and what kind of message that sends, Alex replied. Gates looked away from Alex, but put his back to the bird, leaning on it. Well, I'm no voice of philosophy, Alex. You do it to survive. It's not the survival that bothers me. It's the murder. No offense, Alex, but if Tyrese's stories aren't bullshit, then you already have a lot of murders on your head. That just is what it is. Yeah, but this is different, Sam. In New Purgatory, I had a reason to hate the people in that tower, or every Marine that tried to slot me or my friends. I could justify it. China's on a whole new scale. I'll be killing because it's owed, and not because it's a cause I believe in. That you do, but it gives you a better perspective of your old team, doesn't it? Hell, even of the people who are with you now. I don't understand. What you might have come to realize, Alex, is that if more of your team hadn't died, it might have been changed by the experience. Certainly you, Layla, and Janet must have changed because of what you went through. But what about someone who had no stake in your fight other than to see you succeed? Talia. That's where you're headed now, Alex. It's where all of us are headed, to repay that favor. Because the new day she gave you is what you owe to her, Gates explained. We just have to hope we end up whole on the other side. We will get through it, Gates. We don't have a choice. If we fail, home fails. Whether that battle is mine or not doesn't change that. From what little I know about war, it's not the change of the world's landscape you should worry about. It's the heart. You stand to benefit from this too. Just make sure it's worth it. Gates got up and moved to the ramp, leaving Alex alone in the falling snow. It was nearly time to leave. He gave one more look at his new journal and closed it with the pen inside. What was said was said. Now he had to live up to it.